World War II was over. The defeat of the Axis powers triggered jubilant scenes like this all over the world. The joyous celebrations rang with a hope for the future, that there would be justice and prosperity for all. But none of these celebrations were without the sad remembrance of the countless lives that made victory possible. A particular national sorrow is the death of President Roosevelt. Paul Robeson would read Carl Sandburg's eulogy to President Roosevelt during that period of national mourning. As the world settled into peace, Paul Robeson continued in his sea of many pursuits. He had broadened his study of world language, deepened his analysis of languages, and by now he was competent in some 30 languages: Welsh, Swedish, Chinese, French, Spanish, German, 8 African languages, and Japanese. He also continued his activism in the trade union movement that he had begun in the 30s. Harry Truman was now president of a nation that still seemed unable to solve the problem of racism. The post-war grab for jobs rekindled old conflicts and hatreds.
But those of us who were involved in the Second World War, some of us really felt that in this struggle against fascism, with all the things that we had been propagandized by our own government, that we were told about all the evils of the Axis powers, that if we were to participate fully and to give of ourselves in this struggle against fascism, that when we came back, part of the conquering armies, the victorious horde, that we would, as a group, as blacks, be looked upon by the larger society with infinitely different eyes, with greater compassion, with greater care, with a greater sense of warmth and camaraderie. That we would begin to participate fully in all that the United States had to offer, the American way of life, quote unquote, had to offer. And most of us returned to an excruciatingly cruel experience. There was an intense reaction by the white community in this country, particularly in the South. They gouged out the eyes of a war hero by the name of Isaac Woodard. There was a campaign of lynching and shooting and murder that was, and they said, in fact, that it was now to put the niggers back in their place. We had been to Europe, we'd been to Asia, we'd fought in the war, we'd learned all these things, we'd had a taste of freedom, or at least had been propagandized towards that end. And now that we were back, it was time for us to understand what our real position was.
The Ku Klux Klan grew. Lynchings and brutality scarred the nation. On September 23, 1946, thousands of black and white Americans met at the steps of the Lincoln Monument in Washington as members of a 100-day American crusade to end lynching, co-chaired by Paul Robeson and Albert Einstein. President Truman received a delegation from that crusade in his White House Oval Office. Robeson led that delegation and read a petition asking that Truman include in his next message to Congress a recommendation for the passage of federal anti-lynching legislation. Truman refused, and Robeson told him flatly that if the United States government didn't stop lynching, black people would. Robeson also stepped up his criticism of America's involvement in Africa. As chairman of the Council on African Affairs that he founded in 1937, he called for support of African independence and rallied behind a strike by South African gold miners. He raised a hue and cry against the economic rape of Africa by Western powers. Now remember now, these were the late 40s, and what Robeson was doing, criticizing America, well, you just didn't do those things, especially if you were a black man, however famous. In 1948, former Vice President Henry Wallace was running for the presidency on the new Progressive Party ticket that Robeson helped found. Robeson saw Wallace as far more preferential to Harry Truman, who was from Missouri, and his running mate Alvin Barkley from Kentucky. Also running for that nomination were states' writers Strom Thurmond and Fielding Wright, all vying for the Democratic nomination. Thomas Dewey was a Republican nominee. Wallace carried a pinko label, however, But Robeson gave him his full support, campaigning endlessly across the country. The Pinko label was gradually put on Robeson. Wallace was defeated by Truman for the Democratic nomination. Truman would be the surprise victor over the heavily favored Thomas E. Dewey. Robeson began to get bad press. Increasingly, his name provoked controversy. His support of Wallace, his friendship with Russia, and his oft-expressed admiration for many aspects of socialism, as well as his close friendship with New York City Councilman Benjamin J. Davis of the Communist Party, all served to make the very mention of Robeson's name in some circles cause for argument. But Robeson would not bend. He maintained his Soviet ties publicly. He knew that his highly lucrative artistic career was in jeopardy now, and that he would be vilified. But Paul Robeson was an unusual man, reared with high moral principles by a highly principled father. It was on this moral bedrock that he would take his stand. Never compromise your principles, no matter what. Never take low. Robeson had long since concluded that the plight of the underprivileged was brought on by the abuses of privilege. He saw this as the root of Africa's troubles, and of Afro-America, and of many other exploited peoples. And he said so in full face of America's Cold War with Russia.
It became the concerted effort of the reactionary forces in this country to stay that, to not only mute it, but to turn it back as strongly as possible. It was very hard to turn us against one another on a one-to-one basis, just on a black-white basis. They had to find the handle, and the handle was communism. And on the one hand, here we were, clearly the allies of the Soviet Union and the Yugoslavians and Tito et al., who were blown up as great heroes and great allies in the Second World War. Then we were told, those of us who expressed any love for Russian art, whether it was Tolstoy or Prokofiev or anything, that all of a sudden there was this new turn of events. None of this was kosher. Nothing Russian was acceptable. And this wave, the wave of reactionaryism began to build and build and build, and communism became clearly the target. And anyone who spoke about integration, anyone who spoke about labor, anybody who spoke about pulling together, anybody who spoke about anything that said that there is the Jeffersonian concept is a beautiful concept. Let's try to pull it. Let's fill it. Let's fulfill that mandate. Became a clear target for reactionaries. And they set up many instruments with which to do this. The most important, the most powerful is HUAC, House Un-American Activities Committee.
Questions came from all directions with the same theme. Is Robeson a communist? He swore under oath before a California state legislative hearing that he was not a member of the Communist Party. But still, the questions came. There was indeed a national climate of fear. Red baiting was rampant in those days. The editor of Harlem's Amsterdam News relates an incident in Harlem that illustrates some of the tensions that existed at the time. Baseball pitcher Don Newcomb was in this very bar when Paul Robeson entered with some friends, one of whom spotted the Brooklyn Dodger hero and innocently expressed a wish for Newcomb's autograph.
He, Paul Robeson, got up, went over to Newcomb's table, and said, Don, look, I was sitting right there. He said, Don, one of your fans over here would like to have your autograph. And I was stunned as everybody else. Newcomb went into a rage, started to rant, and said, get away from me. I don't want to have nothing to do with you. I'm getting ready to go in the army to fight your kind of people. Well, as I said, everybody was stunned.
Ew, what was his
Robeson
reaction?
looked at him, and Robeson started to, he rose up because Paul could get, he could get angry very fast, you see. And when Robeson started to rise up again, Newcomb stood up. And when Newcomb stood up, then there was these two giants, and both of them were giants, in this small red rooster bar. And pretty soon, the people haven't heard this. One guy sitting there said, I don't know, but nothing's going to happen to Paul. And I saw a guy pull his blade, see? And by that time, I mean, it was not a matter of choosing up sides. It was just a matter of everybody coming to Paul's side and nuke him back down.
Robeson was barred from several public and broadcast appearances. Even Eleanor Roosevelt succumbed to the growing disenchantment with Robeson. Paul Robeson toured overseas on a heavy concert schedule, and true to form, he refused to avoid going to Russia. During that tour, he went to Paris to participate in the World Peace Congress, better known as the Paris Peace Conference. It was attended by delegates from 60 countries, including artist Pablo Picasso and W.E.B. Du Bois. Robeson delivered a short, unprepared speech that intensified his troubles back in America when it was reported. Dr. Du Bois recalled the most explosive part of that speech. That statement caused strong reaction back in the States. Many thought the remark unpatriotic. Others found it treasonable. In the midst of that reaction, Jackie Robinson, whose entrance into Major League Baseball was at least partly due to Robeson's early advocacy, made this voluntary statement before a hearing committee in Washington.
I've been asked to express my views on Paul Robeson's statement in Paris to the effect that American Negroes would refuse to fight in any war against Russia because we love Russia so much. I haven't any comment to make except that, on that statement, except that if Mr. Robeson actually made it, it sounds very silly to me.
Well, his reaction was one of great compassion for Jackie Robinson. He said that he must have suffered for what they made him do, and suffered a long time. So instead of feeling, I told you so, or any gloating over Jackie Robinson's change of heart, he only felt sorry for Jackie Robinson.
Perhaps none of the hatred and vilification thrown at Robeson ever rivaled what he encountered in 1949. The summer of that year, he scheduled a concert for the benefit of the Harlem chapter of the Civil Rights Congress. It was to take place in Peekskill, New York. The forces of anti-Semitism and anti-black were wedded to the forces of anti-communism, and they descended on a mixed crowd of 20,000 persons who had come to hear a man named Robeson sing folk songs about freedom.
Coming along here is another group of veterans. Apparently they have broken up their parade into sections. Police have detoured the traffic to keep the street on which the veterans are parading free of cars. All cars have been circling around the area, entering the concert grounds from what would amount to the rear. There's a group of young boys here yelling at the people in their cars. There's been the first bit of violence. I don't know who started it. Police have grabbed someone here. Police are pushing everyone back. The parade is broken up at the entrance, and the veterans are running back here. Police helicopter is overhead. The first bit of violence. The situation has gotten very tense there. There's no longer any order to the parade, just men moving back and forth on the highway.
Oh, this is horrible. Filling crowd is trying desperately to keep these people back. The police are fighting the cops, and they are beating up a Negro. They're beating up, not supporting him, they're clubbing him.
You see, Paul was fine as long as, you know, that as long as he was a singer and an actor and an entertainer and a concert artist and everything else. That was fine. That was acceptable. But when he began to more, because there had been a history before the point that you're talking about, the late 40s, when he began to more actively speak out against the oppression of black people and his international point of view, then that wasn't acceptable, and that's when the attacks began to happen. When when an artist began to say, well, I am a citizen, and I understand the importance that politics have in my own life, and economics and all of these things, that began to intelligently speak upon and about these issues, then that was not, that's when he began to undergo what you described as the turning point of this fusillade, this massive attack to destroy him.
A curtain of silence fell over Robeson. It was as though he had been obliterated with a giant eraser. From the best-known man on earth, he became a man whose name could only be whispered. The final blow came from the U.S. State Department. His passport was revoked.
Not only was I not allowed to go out, but I was also prevented from actually appearing in my own land. Concert halls were denied to me for many years. I was refused theaters. I have never been on American television, for example. That is, I've been blacklisted, as have many of my colleagues in America for whatever reason. As you saw the other day, Arthur Miller was in difficulty. But in many of our cases, it meant that we couldn't even, I have been able to practice my craft there. So I would say, no, you can't, I do not regret in any sense what I have done. I had, some of my friends feel I could have done things in other ways. One has to do them as one sees life. I regret, I can't even use the term regret. I'm very proud, in one sense, of any contribution I've been able to make to the struggles of my people. So if you want freedom, you have to suffer sometimes.
Basic stance that he always took, one of the elements in his uncompromising position, is that he felt that his own personal success could not in any way be used to push aside the oppression of blacks, of his whole people in America. And he made that not just a national issue, but an international issue. And the cry was going up, well, you shouldn't expose America's internal problems on the international arena. He said, on the contrary, everywhere I go, I'm going to do that. Everywhere in the world, I'm going to call attention to the fact that there is no democracy, no equality for blacks in America. So that was one reason. The second reason is that he felt that, and he said quite definitely, that blacks should claim their rights and take them, not beg for them.
Then something unexpected happened. The black community stood up and threw its arms around Paul. His own people, for whom he had fought so hard and long, and had sacrificed so much for, came to his defense. He had a platform now, and he had an audience.
I've had a very tremendous success at home. Do a great deal to support, which would interest you, from the Negro people. In the Negro churches, I had chances to sing. And my whole career has been reestablished in America by way of the Negro churches. Very interesting.
Looking back, is that in spite of everything they did and tried to do to Dad, to isolate him, to crush him economically, politically, even physically, in the sense that he was followed, he was all kinds of things. He survived, and he survived without compromising, without, as he put it, stepping back 1/1000th part of 1 inch. And not only survived, but bit by bit, from the times in 1950 and 51 where people were so frightened that many friends of his wouldn't cross the street to say hello, or would just step aside, or even cross to the other side of the street, not to be seen with him, with some very fascinating exceptions. For instance, at that kind of time, Dizzy Gillespie spoke of his friendship for Paul Robeson from the stage of the Apollo Theater, and Charlie Parker came from wherever he was to step on stage at a rally that Dad was speaking, and said, yeah, Paul Robeson's my friend, I don't care what they say about him. So there were some very courageous and very moving exceptions to that.
He used to come to see me. I remember one time in the midst of his troubles, you know, the troubles that he was having with the government, and denial of opportunity to pursue his livelihood. He'd just been at a meeting. There was a meeting on 125th Street, and I was appearing at the Apollo at the time. And I was in the audience, to listen to him speak. And I went back to the theater, and then I got a telegram a little later saying that he was in the show. He went and caught the performance, but he didn't come backstage because he didn't want to subject me to any kind of a harassment or anything. I called him up and I say, if I got to be harassed by your presence, I'll take it. That'll be my cross to bear. Let me bear my own cross. Yes, because he was really something special.
From abroad came waves of support and sympathy. 16 members of British Parliament petitioned the U.S. State Department to let Paul Robeson go. Without a passport, Robeson could not leave the country, but even that didn't cut him off from the world that loved him so. He gave an incredible concert at the Canadian border before tens of thousands who were standing on the other side. It went largely unreported. You went through the years and you've examined other years where the full heat was on this man.
Yes.
And the crux of the question was whether or not he was a communist.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about it?
Well, actually, the things for which he was persecuted, like the Council on African Affairs, were things which today are not considered subversive. Of course, after the African countries have now achieved their independence, it's all right to be for independence of Africa after the fact. But his beliefs, as you know, he testified that he was not, at one time, he testified that he was not a member of the Communist Party. Then he stopped he refused to make any such statements because that was being used against people for denial of passports or denial of employment, and he refused to take an oath because he was opposed to it in principle. But in terms of his own beliefs, he had, through his humanistic concern, through the brotherhood of man concept, he had developed the idea, as others did of our people, like Dr. Du Bois and Ben Davis Jr. and others, that we needed to have a more ethical form of society than we have now.
He gave a transatlantic concert by telephone for the Welsh miners in Wales, perhaps one of the most moving and emotional of his long concert career.
Hello, Paul Robeson. On behalf of the South Wales miners and all the people gathered at this Eisteddfod, I extend to you warm greetings of friendship and respect. Our people deplore the continued refusal of your government to return your passport and to deny you the right to join with us in our festival of song. We shall continue to exert what influence we can to overcome this position.
My warmest greetings to the people of my beloved Wales, and a special hello to the miners of South Wales at this great festival. It is a great privilege to be participating in this historic festival, and all the best to you as we strive toward a world where we all can live abundant, peaceful, and dignified lives. Why the moon what is keeping all through?
He was awarded the Stalin Peace Prize, but he couldn't go to Russia to claim it. He received it instead in New York. Dr. Du Bois was also a recipient.
I can recall when I was a accredited correspondent at the United Nations, Robeson won the Stalin Award, and Robeson came back to the United States. I was sitting in a press room there on the 3rd floor, and I said to some of the guys there, hey, how about it? Let's go over, and I know where Robeson is. Let's go over and interview him on the Stalin Award. And a shout went up, hey, have you lost your mind? And I said, what do you mean? Man, look, the FBI be around that place so much that, you probably couldn't get in. And if you get in, you got a tag on you. So I said, well, I'm going over. And the guy said, you're really going? I went over, and I interviewed him. And on my way home, when I was living in Brooklyn, when I got to Brooklyn that evening, and got out of my car in front of my house, Park Place, 2 FBI men actually had tailed me from Manhattan, too. And they stopped me on the street and talked to me, asked me, because I asked, well, you know, why are you following me? I said, is it because I interviewed Paul Robeson today?
From his Jumel Terrace apartment in Manhattan, he recorded and sent a film message to the 1957 World Youth Festival in Moscow.
Здравствуйте. It is indeed a great privilege to be able to say a few words to this historic conference of the youth of the world, demanding peace and friendship among all the peoples of the earth. And it is a source of deep regret that many of us here in America are not able to be with you in person. But know that thousands and thousands in our land want peace, cultural exchange, and friendship, as do you. I recall vividly the days of my own son's youth, spent with many of you in the Soviet Union, in England, and in other lands. He also sends his warmest greetings. All success in these most important deliberations. Сердечный привет to all of you. Water boy, where are you hiding? If you don't come, I'm gonna tell your daddy. There ain't no hammer that's on this mountain that rings like mine, boys, that rings like mine. I done bust this rock, boys, from here to Macon, all the way to the jail, boys. Yes, back to the jail. It's part of a work song that you've often heard me sing, I'm sure.
Finally, the U.S. State Department was forced to yield to the crush of protests from around the world, as well as from the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. In July of 1950,
I don't want to play a fellow.
Almost immediately, he was off on a triumphant world concert tour. Incredibly, he showed not bitterness nor resentment. It was a spectacular tour spanning England, Wales, France, and Russia. It was a standing room only affair wherever he went. The gentle warrior, the man of unbending principle, had returned.
Русскую народную песню «Ноченька» Поль Робсон поет вместе с Иваном Семеновичем Козловским.
To give you an idea of how highly Robeson was esteemed in Russia, a mountain has been given his name. Yes, a mountain.
After this tour, are you going to go back to the United States?
Well, I hope to be here for an extended tour, but as I just said before, one wonderful thing has happened. You must remember that with all the struggles, that I'm very proud to say, that the struggle has been won in my own case, in my own land, in America. And as I pointed out, I have just finished a long concert tour all over America, and as a matter of fact, if I hadn't gotten my passport, I would be now singing in the largest halls in America at the highest prices. So I intend to go back sometime.
Back in America, the civil rights movement was underway. Many of the ideas and principles that Robeson had expressed decades earlier were now being echoed, sadly, by many who didn't even know who Paul Robeson was. Robeson's concert career continued. He also gave his last interpretation of Othello in London. In 1965, tragedy struck. His wife, Islanda, passed away and was afflicted with the deteriorative disease called arteriosclerosis. He saw only his family and close friends now. No interviews were ever given. Robeson felt that his track record spoke for itself, and who could argue? In his retirement, he watched world events unfold on television. He watched as many of the issues on which he had taken a stand proven right. How ironic it must have been for Robeson to sit and watch American presidents visit Russia and China, especially Richard Nixon, who as a young congressman had been such an avid red baiter and communist hater during those witch hunt days of the 50s. And how good Robeson must have felt as he watched one African nation after another attain the independence that he had advocated for so long. In 1973, a tribute to Paul Robeson was given at New York's Carnegie Hall in celebration of his 75th birthday. It was put together by some of those who loved him and had fought with him down through the years. The proceeds of the tribute were used to establish the Paul Robeson Archives, a non-profit organization that would collect, preserve, and catalog the life work of Paul Robeson. On Friday, January 23rd, 1976, at noon, death claimed Paul Robeson.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We're soldiers of the cross.
But I think that we have all been fortunate to have had this man walk the earth among us. In him, we have had a vision, really, of how beautiful the human race can become. He is a man, as I see it, of the future.
And higher, we're soldiers of the cross. Rise and shine and give God the glory. Rise and shine and give God the glory. Rise and shine and give God the glory. We're soldiers.
The physical remains of Paul Robeson end here. But what about the man's story? Surely it represents a major chapter in America's history. The tragedy is that story has hardly been told. Mass media has, in fact, suppressed large amounts of information about this man. Despite exhaustive research, we were unable to come up with precious little news film that was shot of this man here in this country. You undoubtedly noticed how much still photographs we had to use. And what little motion picture that we did include in this documentary came from overseas. Not even the Library of Congress has much to offer in film on this man, Paul Robeson. Where is that film, we ask? We also ask, why has his name not been listed in our books? Books about our history, America's history, the history of the Civil Rights Movement, the American arts. We also ask why his name has not been listed on the Football Hall of Fame. Maybe now, in death, his name will rise up again and claim its proper place in our history. Certainly our children should know that story. It is a story of strength and gentleness, commitment and unbending principle.